2 weeks ago, my boss insisted on having a team dinner at a fancy uptown restaurant. I'd expected to be home by 9, but we were there until closing. It was late enough when I pulled out of the parking garage that anything outside the glow of streetlights had been swallowed by the abyss. The streets were empty enough that I didn't have to pay too much attention to the road, which gave me freedom to grind my teeth and fantasize about how I'd call my boss out for this. I live in one of those mid-sized US cities that's technically got a lot of history, but everybody who lives here moved in from out of state. You know the kind. Trains used to be really big here. Unless you're uptown or only use the highways, driving anywhere requires crossing tracks, only a few of which are still in service. My route took me over multiple that night alone, all of which were pretty familiar except this one. The city had started doing roadwork on my usual route, making an already bad night even worse by forcing me down an old back road with a hastily placed detour sign. No streetlights, only thick woods on each side. To call it a forest would be misleading. I was in the middle of the city, but a much less developed part of the city where people still sometimes had to stop for deer. I kept my focus in the distance, hoping the turn was soon, and drumming my fingers against the steering wheel. It didn't even register to me that there was a railroad crossing ahead until I heard the sound of growling thunder. There was another full second before I realized what was happening and pumped the brakes hard, skidding to a stop just a few yards from the tracks. The damn crossing gates were broken, the arms didn't come down, and there were no flashing lights or warning bells. The train itself made me jump when it just appeared in my headlights. No whistle or headlight of its own to let anyone know it was coming. LAX fucking standards. My arms were shaking, and since I had a moment, I put the car into park and left myself a voice memo to call City Hall about their broken railroad gates. This kind of negligence was going to kill someone. I leaned back in my seat to let it pass. This train was moving pretty fast, probably faster than regulation allowed, but it would still be a good minute before it was gone. Closing my eyes, I let the relaxing thunk, thunk, thunk wash over me, more soothing than any meditation audio. My first apartment had been less than 100 feet from the tracks, and maybe I was weird, but it was a comforting thing to listen to while I was up late reading before bed. Trains are always a little longer than you think they will be, but it was still irritating to glance down at the radio clock and see that it had been a good 5 minutes already. That wasn't unheard of, sadly, even if it was pushing the upper limits of acceptable. Maybe night trains get more leeway because there's less traffic. I stretched and placed my hands back on the steering wheel, watching the train and waiting for it to end in the next minute. But as it stretched on, I noticed something odd. It was moving fast enough that I hadn't gotten a good look at the train cars before. This wasn't a freight train. All I could see were passenger cars instead of the familiar box cars. Did passenger lines even pass through here? And I couldn't be sure, but they didn't look new either. There might have been sitting figures inside, but none of the cars were lit up, so maybe I was seeing what I wanted to see. Motion to my left caught my attention. Low branches rustled in the darkness, and it took a few moments for me to realize that there wasn't any wind. It wasn't the whole woods rustling, just the lower branches. I decided that it had to be the slipstream of the train, just as the movement congealed into a silhouette only barely visible against the tree line. Someone had stepped out of the woods, and they were moving in my direction. I wasn't tired anymore. My chest hurt, and I clenched the steering wheel as tightly as I could. Who was this? A carjacker? They didn't have any light on them to see by. They were moving toward me, but slowly, shambling almost. Behind them, another figure stepped out of the tree line. Facing forward, I shifted into drive. The train was still going. It had been 7 minutes, 8, and the train was still going, faster than before, I think. Some of the racing passenger cars had an eerie blue light inside, but in the moment they'd flash by, there wasn't time to see if they were occupied. I didn't have the courage to turn my head, but I glanced to the side. Whoever was out there had made it to the road. There was the faint sound of scraping against pavement. They were dragging their feet. Sometimes I still wake up in a cold sweat after hearing it in my dreams. Now there was a movement on the other side of the car, but I didn't turn to check. Eyes forward, foot anchored on the brake, I stared straight ahead. In a moment of clarity, I realized that I did not want to know what these people looked like and shut off my headlights. Now the train was as dark as the forest around me, discernible only from the sound of thunder and quick bursts of unearthly blue light. Something pressed against the window, followed by the teeth-grating squeak of fingers sliding down glass. My chest was too tight to breathe. It was giving me tunnel vision. Even though my hands were white from clutching the steering wheel, I couldn't feel anything. More thumps against the glass, more damnable squeaking on each side of me. I didn't check the rearview mirror, but by some miracle none had stepped closer to the hood where I could see them better. Then they started to gurgle. I was about to pass out from how hard it was to breathe. It had been 10, 11, 12 minutes. The sounds of their moans were muffled by the glass, but sounded too close to English for me to block out entirely. I know that our brains look for patterns, and two people can have very different memories of the same experience. But I swear to God, they said my name. The clock ticked over to 12:13, and I slammed the gas pedal before consciously registering that the train had disappeared. There was a moment of tyres squealing as they struggled to grab the road before I was launched forward way too fast. It took me a few seconds of fumbling to get the headlights back on, just in time to see the elusive detour sign and hit the brakes so I could make the turn. I made the trip home well above the speed limit and did not check the rearview mirror once. The cops could have me. Hell, I would have settled for an actual carjacking if it meant getting to see another human being. I only slowed down when I entered my neighborhood, but still kept my eyes fixed on the road ahead. The houses were dark, and it felt wrong to bring my car's headlights into this still and silent environment. Finally, I pulled into my driveway and cut the engine, then fumbled to pull the garage remote from where it was clipped to the sun visor and hit the button for the outdoor lights. Sitting there, bathed in a spotlight that lit up the whole neighborhood, I was still too nervous to look anywhere but at the closed garage door. My mouth was dry. I would eventually have to get out and go inside. Whatever had closed in on me at the train tracks couldn't be anywhere near here, and it would only take about 30 seconds to get into the house anyway. But I couldn't make my body move through logical reasoning. There were sickly green smudges all over the window. It was the most terrified I had ever been in my life. But I did force myself out of the car and into the house. I didn't sleep at all that night and had to call in sick the next day. Slowly, I'm getting more confident behind the wheel again, but my wife is disappointed that I've started refusing to stay out after dark without explaining why. Crime rates going up sounds like paranoia to her. What other excuse can I come up with though? I know that as time passes, it'll be less nerve-wracking to think about. This all happened earlier in the month, so it's super fresh in my mind. I get startled easily if I see someone out of the corner of my eye, and I never look at the tree line anymore during evening traffic, even when I'm on the highway. There hasn't been any sign or sighting of anything I experienced, even on the news, but sometimes I think I hear the scraping of feet against the road. It's all in my head, I know, but what really makes it hard to forget the experience is all the times I'm laying in bed, very nearly asleep, and I hear the sound of a train passing less than 100 feet from my window. And that's the end of this story. If you enjoyed it, please consider subscribing. Until next time, take care and thank you for watching.